In the previous video we learnt about consequences of World War I. In this video we will study about the various treaties that were signed after the Great War. World War I was one of the great watersheds of 20th century geopolitical history which led to the fall of four great imperial dynasties: Germany, Russia, Austria-Hungary, Turkey and Ottoman. This in turn resulted in Bolshevik revolution in Russia and destabilization of European society, successfully laying the groundwork for World War II. A treaty is a formally concluded and ratified agreement between states in a written form and is governed by law. International treaties are those agreements between the states which are of contractual nature and produce legal rights and obligations. The purpose of treaties is to create a binding nature of obligations on the parties to the treaties. The Great War involved several battles fought by different countries. People realized the necessity and importance of peace. Hence, peace conference was held and several treaties were signed between the nations after the Great War. Paris Peace Conference 1919 to 1920. Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, March 3, 1918. Treaty of Versailles, June 28, 1919. Treaty of Saint-Germain-en-Laye, September 10, 1919. Treaty of Neuilly, November 27, 1919. Treaty of Trianon, June 4, 1920. Treaty of Sèvres, August 1920. Creation of League of Nations played an important role in building peace among nations. In this video we will majorly focus on Treaty of Versailles, Paris Peace Conference and creation of League of Nations as they actually changed the entire course of history and have created a huge impact in making peace. Paris Peace Conference. The Paris Peace Conference, formally opened on January 18, 1919, was the international meeting that established the terms of peace after World War I. It is also known as Versailles Peace Conference as it held in Versailles, just outside Paris. In this meeting the Allied victors set the peace terms for the defeated Central Powers. It took place in Paris during 1919 and involved diplomats from more than 32 countries and nationalities, including some non-governmental groups, but the defeated powers were not invited. The Big Four, who made all the major decisions, were President Woodrow Wilson of the United States, Prime Minister David Lloyd George of Great Britain, George Clemenceau of France, and Italian Prime Minister Vittorio Orlando. Each major power had its own agenda coming to the conference and not every aim was represented in the final treaties. The Americans' vision was set out in Wilson's 14 points, which emphasized free trade, self-determination, national security, world peace and the founding of a League of Nations to support territorial and political independence of member nations. British aims at the conference were focused on securing France, settling territorial disputes, and maintaining their colonial holdings. France's main concern was to ensure Germany would not be able to attack them again, so they pushed to weaken Germany militarily, strategically, and economically. Italy was motivated by gaining the territories promised by the Allies in the secret Treaty of London. The Paris Conference held 6 plenary sessions. The stated aim of the conference was to create a peaceful new social order, to secure democracy in the world, and to establish an international organization for peaceful settlement of international disputes. The major outcomes of this conference were establishment of League of Nations and negotiation of 5 treaties, namely, Treaty of Versailles, Treaty of Saint-Germain, Treaty of Neuilly, Treaty of Trianon and Treaty of Sèvres. The Big Four dominated the proceedings that led to the formulation of the Treaty of Versailles, a treaty that ended World War I. Treaty of Versailles. A post-war treaty called the Treaty of Versailles was signed between Imperial Germany and the Allied powers on 28 June 1919. in the palace at Versailles near Paris. The treaty ended the state of war that had existed between Germany and the Allies from 1914 and brought World War I to an end. The treaty declared Germany and its allies responsible for all loss and damage suffered by the Allies in World War I, and as a consequence they were forced to pay war reparations to the victors. The treaty consisted of harsh conditions like demilitarization of Rhineland, a loosely defined area of western Germany along the Rhine, loss of resource-rich Alsace-Lorraine to France, loss of territories in the east to Russia. Germany lost all of its colonies and the victors annexed them. Loss of Germany's African colonies to the League of Nations. Germany was not supposed to build any more warships. Germany's military strength was to be confined to 1 lakh. Huge war indemnity of £6,600 million was imposed on Germany. Germany should not impose compulsory military training upon its citizens. All these conditions were imposed to ensure that Germany has to undergo moral humiliation and economic, military subordination to the Anglo-French. However, the intention backfired. The very conditions imposed on Germany forcibly became the major reason for the rise of German nationalism under Hitler. We will learn about this in our next video series. German people were so humbled that Hitler's every move against the Treaty of Versailles was welcomed by the German public with great cheer. Hence, the Treaty of Versailles planted the seeds of hatred among German minds instead of establishing peace, leading to the Second World War. Reactions to Treaty of Versailles. There were mixed reactions in Britain and France, as the general opinion in Britain was that the terms were fair and should have been more severe. On the other hand, in France people approved of the reparations that Germany had to pay. USA reactions to the treaty were generally negative. Many Americans felt that the treaty was unfair on Germany. More importantly, they felt that Britain and France were making themselves rich at Germany's expense. Reactions to the treaty in Germany were very negative. There were protests in the German parliament and out on the streets. Germans faced a huge loss, in terms of land, overseas colonies, its coal and iron industry, and most importantly human lives. There was much criticism about the treaty because it was too harsh on Germany. Some historians consider it appropriate while others refer it to a disastrous half measure. League of Nations. The League of Nations was established at the end of World War I as an international peacekeeping organization. The Treaty of Versailles was negotiated at the Paris Peace Conference of 1919, and included a covenant establishing the League of Nations, which convened its first council meeting on January 16, 1920. The League was composed of a General Assembly, a permanent secretariat and an executive council, the membership of which was restricted to the great powers. The council consisted of 4 permanent members, Great Britain, France, Japan, and Italy, and 4 non-permanent members. The League of Nations was comprised of 58 member states. The Soviet Union joined in 1934 but was expelled in 1939 for invading Finland. The League sought to peacefully resolve territorial disputes between members and was in some cases highly effective. Achievements of League of Nations. City of Vilna, which in 1920 was occupied by Russia, was returned to Poland after League of Nations involvement. It also resolved a dispute between Germany and Poland over Upper Silesia in 1921. League of Nations also successfully resolved issues involving smaller nations on many occasions, including between Finland and Sweden over Åland Island in 1920, a border argument between Albania and Greece, disputes between Hungary and Romania, etc. Failures of League of Nations. When it came to issue involving bigger powers, the League failed miserably. The Manchuria crisis in 1932 was a major failure of League of Nations. Japan invaded Manchuria in China, but the League could do nothing to help China against Japanese aggression. When Russia, which was not a member of the League, attacked a port in Persia in 1920, the League refused to take part. The League's efforts at disarmament also failed to halt the military buildup by Germany, Italy, Spain and Japan during the 1930s. Major reasons for the failure are simply complicated mandate, lack of military, narrow international support, countries unwilling to give up autonomy and fear of failure. The onset of the Second World War demonstrated that the League had failed in its primary purpose, the prevention of another world war. The absence of the United States was a significant factor in rendering the League of Nations ineffectual. The organization's importance was further minimized by the lack of respect among other great powers. The League was formally disbanded in April 1946 with its powers and functions transferred to the United Nations. Therefore, it can be concluded that some treaties were not important, but some treaties have a relevance till date.